All right. A couple of weeks ago, I was invited to a rugby game with Owen. At half-time, there was quite a gap in the score, and Owen turned to me and said, "I thought this was going to be close." To which I replied, "You've not supported Scotland very long." Sometimes knowing where we are in proceedings, past history, in our case, origin stories, can help us to know where we fit into history. Previously in our talks, we've looked at Genesis 1-3. God made the heavens and the earth, the plants, the animals, and our first ancestors, Adam and Eve. When he was finished, things were looking very good. Then our ancestors disobeyed God by listening to the serpent and by eating fruit, trying to become like God. Now, God has a plan to use human history to bring about a purpose that reveals who he is, what his values are, and helps us, his image bearers, reflect him as they were created to. This plan was gradually carried out over the span of a few thousand years, with God revealing himself to various people in different ways, and culminated in the death of Jesus around 2,000 years ago. But why did Jesus have to die? Why did he pray, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done"? Now we've just remembered that he did drink that cup. But what had led up to that moment? Surely there was another way. Today, we're going to look at some of the signs and circumstances that surrounded God's rescue plan to save humanity from their own sin and rebellion. We're going to look at some of the passages from the Old Testament and how that revealed his plan, that prophesied directly about a coming Messiah, and some that foreshadowed the role he will play. So let's jump right in where we left off. In Genesis 6, we get introduced to Noah, a man who found favor with God and was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. Now, admittedly, the bar was set very low by these people, as Genesis 6 verse 5 says, "Every inclination of the thoughts of their heart was only evil all the time." So, God, rightly grieved by the wickedness and violence of mankind, rightly judges and promises to put an end to all people. But God gives grace to Noah and commands him to build a boat, which he does over the span of 120 years. Once all 8 people and the animals were on board, God shuts the door, the springs of the deep burst forth, the rain falls, and everyone else begins to swim for a little while. Well, that's the human sin problem solved right there. A quick reset. We just needed to start with righteous people, didn't we? No? Well, they come off the boat. God blesses Noah and his sons and tells them to go forth and multiply, and promises that never again will he wipe out all life on earth. And as a sign of this covenant, or promise that God made with all living things, he put his rainbow in the sky, which, as a side note, is a great choice of symbol for those who are actively rebelling against God. You can't kill me again. So, Noah and his descendants multiply, and God disperses them by confusing their language. 11 generations later, we get introduced to Abram, a 75-year-old man. Now, at this point, Abram hasn't done much, but God, well, he speaks to Abram directly. God starts the conversation and tells him, "Leave your country, your people, your fathers, your household, and go to the land I will show you." And God promises him, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." God promises Abram land for him and his descendants forever. God continues to make promises to Abram that he would have an heir of his own. Abram believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. God tells Abram that his descendants will be like the stars in the sky, that they will be enslaved and ill-treated in a country not their own, and after 400 years, that God will bring them out of the land and bring them to their own land, because the sin of the Amorites had not yet reached its full measure. Now, Abram's wife Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from children. Go and sleep with Hagar my maidservant. Perhaps I can have family through her." When Abram was 86, Ishmael was born, from whom many of the Arab nations descend. When Abram is 99, God appeared to him again and tells him, "Your name will be Abraham. Your wife's name will be Sarah, not Sarai, and I will bless her, and you will have a son by her." Through this son, God promises to establish his covenant, and the sign of this covenant was circumcision. Ouch. So Isaac is born to Abram and Sarah, the son of the promise. Now, in Genesis 22, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there and worship. We will worship and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he carried with himself the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. So he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." Isaac in turn had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob later gets renamed Israel, he who wrestles with God. He has 12 sons who sell one of their brothers into slavery. He in turn becomes second in command to the Pharaoh of Egypt, and through a famine, his whole family moves from the Promised Land to Egypt. Almost 400 years later, God appears to Moses from a burning bush and tells him that God is going to use him to rescue the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. He sends Moses and his brother Aaron to tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And when he refuses, God will stretch out a mighty hand with signs and acts of judgment in order to bring out his people. God patiently gives Pharaoh time to obey, but after refusing on 9 occasions, the 10th judgment was the death of the firstborn. Moses was commanded to tell all the people on a certain day to sacrifice a year-old male lamb without defect and to apply its blood to their doors and lintels, and that on that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when you see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt." This became one of the annual festivals of the Israelite people. After this, the people left Egypt, miraculously crossed the Red Sea, and entered the desert. During this season, God commanded that a tabernacle or tent of meeting be made, where his presence could dwell in the middle of the camp. The law was given to Moses, which described how sinful people were to behave in respect to a holy God. This included moral, ceremonial, and civil law, and included sin offerings, where a person would substitute a faultless animal in order to symbolize the punishment that they deserved. The Day of Atonement is the holiest day in the Israelite calendar, where sin offerings are made for the high priest and the people. 2 goats are taken, the lots are drawn. One is sacrificed while the other is set free. God then laid out the plan for his chosen people. He gives abundant blessings if the Israelites obey the commands from God, but also warns them what happens if they disobey. Their leader spoke with God face to face. The whole nation had witnessed God work miracles in front of their very eyes. They had proof that God was real and performed wonders. He defied the laws of nature. He provided and cared for them on a daily basis, and on top of that, had provided the law so the people could know what God's standards are. Of course, God's people would be only too happy to obey him. They would teach their children all about God in such a way that they would never even try to rebel. Of course, that was all that was missing, and the human problem was solved forever. No, humanity was still broken, still not able to follow God. The people complain a lot while God miraculously feeds them in the desert. They send spies into the land, whose report causes the people to fear the nations that God has promised to drive out in judgment. These same people refuse to obey God, and so he makes them wander in the desert until the next generation grow up, 40 years later. The Israelites enter the promised land under the leadership of Joshua and begin to take possession of the land promised to Abraham. Joshua sets up each of the tribes with their boundaries by drawing lots. However, once again, despite seeing God work wonders and miracles, the people disobeyed God, and he allowed other nations to attack them. When the Israelites repented of their sin and called out to God, he remembered them and sent judges to deliver them. God starts to raise up prophets through this period, notably Samuel, who mediated between God and his chosen people honorably. You might say, if only God was in charge of our nation, we didn't need a government, no king, no bureaucrats. God makes our laws. God directly appointed leaders who had short terms. Then we would be able to live our lives that honored God, and the sin problem would be solved. No, the people looked at the nations around them and decided, we want a king. So after warning them about the perils of living under a king, God gives the people what they wanted. So God told his prophet Samuel to anoint Saul king, which he did. And as is often the way, it started out well. However, Saul disobeyed God on several occasions, including one time when he was told to completely wipe out a people group as God's judgment, which Saul disobeyed and didn't do. This disobedience eventually led to God removing the kingdom from him and his family and giving it instead to a young shepherd boy called David. David grew up and wrote many psalms, which are recorded. He is a man who is commended as being a man after God's own heart, and despite flaws and failings, repented and turned back to God. He was anointed king and succeeded Saul as king. It was at this point that David intended to build a temple for God, to dwell among his people. But God refused, telling David that Solomon his son would build it instead, and that God would establish David's throne forever. David dies, and Solomon his son then becomes king and reigns on his father's throne. He builds the temple and asks God for wisdom. When the temple is complete, he dedicates it, and God appears to him again, renewing the covenant and agreement between God and the Israelites. So the people have kings chosen by God, a nice, simple governing structure where God can interact with the head of state. Obviously, that's what the people needed to obey God. He very clearly laid out a nice logical agreement with clear consequences. They'd be mad to disobey God. Does this work? No. For a little while it seems to. There were some good kings, although none were perfect. More often, however, kings were led astray, power corrupted. They trusted in their armies or foreign nations rather than God. Some were foolish, some were evil. Solomon's son causes the kingdom to be split in two. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. The northern kingdom is a mess. God sends them various prophets, but they ignore them. And about 200 years after Solomon dies, they're wiped out by the Assyrians. The southern kingdom of Judah isn't much better. The Davidic family line continues. There are some kings who obey God. Many do not. God still sends them prophets. Some of them are listened to, some are mocked, and some are killed. Amongst them include Isaiah's prophecy about a time coming when God will miraculously enter into humanity. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel, God with us. Another of Isaiah's prophecies. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne, and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness, from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. He will be called Mighty God. He will rule on the throne of David forever, and establish it with justice and righteousness. The Lord Almighty will do this. That sounds more like the thing. Well, back to the Jewish nation. God allows the Babylonians to capture them, and they are carried off into slavery for 70 years. Even during this time, God still sends his prophets, like Jeremiah. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Ezekiel also prophesied around this time about a future time when God would help solve the human problem. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. God then uses the Persians to judge the Babylonians, and under the rule of Cyrus, he allows the Israelites to return to Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple and the walls. This is recorded in Ezra and Nehemiah. And the people, again, read the word of the Lord and renew the covenant with God, realizing that they had not upheld their end of the bargain. Now some Jews remained in the nations to which they were carried, which include Mordecai and Esther, who ended up in the court of King Xerxes of Persia. This is the same Xerxes who fought Leonidas and the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. It was during his reign from Susa that they thwarted a plot by Haman the Agagite to destroy all the Jews. Now, if you remember King Saul, who disobeyed God in not killing the Amalekites, as God had commanded him, this might have seemed harsh at the time, but if he had obeyed, this whole plot could never have happened, as Haman is descended directly from them. So as the Old Testament closes, the Jewish nation is an occupied territory. Although they do have the favour of their Persian overlords, they have a temple, even if it isn't as impressive as the original, as it was destroyed by the Babylonians. And they are able to sacrifice to God. However, there is still no clear way for humanity to deal with their sin problem. Yes, they have sacrifices, but that doesn't solve the problem. God has demonstrated that humanity cannot uphold their end of the bargain. They cannot do this by their own might, strength, or wisdom. No amount of good works can fix the problem. God has been faithful throughout. He made promises and has kept every one of them so far. And some have still not had their conclusion. We've tried a lot of ways to fix things. We've tried a hard reset, starting with a righteous family. We had God working miracles in front of the entire nation. We tried a nation with a leader who spoke face to face with God. We tried God's written law. We tried no government with God providing leadership as required. We had prophets who spoke in behalf of God. We had kings like the surrounding nations. We were judged and taken into captivity, and then miraculously released, with foreign nations ruling over us. None of it solved the human problem. The only time where man was able to do what God wanted was when they trusted him by faith. But there's still a lot of loose ends. Had God forgotten his promise to restore the kingdom? Who was the Messiah? When will he come? Where is this king who will rule on the throne of David? What options are left? God has been faithful, patient, holy, just, and fair, but mankind has been incapable of upholding their end of the bargain. If something is going to work, it is going to need God to do the heavy lifting. How will humanity's sin problem be solved? Well, there is hope. There are some loose ends that have not yet had their fulfillment. God has promised that he is going to dwell with us, that we should look out for a virgin who conceived, that a boy is to be born who will be called Mighty God, that God will remove our lifeless heart and replace it with a heart of living flesh, and that God will put his Spirit in us, which will allow us to keep his laws and decrees. Have you received this Spirit? This Christmas season, let us remember this long-awaited solution to humanity's sin problem. There was no other way to remove the cup of God's wrath. There is no way for us to deal with our sin by ourselves. A greater sacrifice was always going to be needed. We cannot do this of our own will or effort. We as humans are not good. We go astray. We need the perfect sacrifice, and Jesus willingly came to provide that for us. A few questions as we close. If you're new to all this, have you examined what the Bible says about Jesus? If not, can I encourage you to do so? If you would like some help with it or someone to go through it with you, there will be lots of people here who are willing to do that with you. For everyone else, are you fully trusting in Jesus' sacrifice? Or are there times where you try to earn your forgiveness? Are you inviting others to hear the good news? I'll pray as we close. Father God, thank you that you so loved the world, that you gave your one and only Son, that whomsoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Thank you that you made a way where you do all the heavy lifting, and we trust in that work. Amen.